Welcome to One Word Stories. My name is Joanna Zell, and I'm really happy to host a very special guest of mine. Today, Pari Namazie is with us. Pari is a leadership facilitator. She's an executive coach, and actually she brings lots of experience in the organizational development. She works with global companies, and she works a lot with executive teams and of course with global leaders. And this was the reason why I said Pari is the person to go when we want to talk about working with stories in the leadership context, but not only in the leadership context, but really for global leaders. Maybe one more tiny detail. I'm double happy to host Pari because of our experience in the intercultural field. We managed to see each other in different wonderful places, to also meet other interculturalists and people who work in the field. And it's always a real pleasure to talk about the field of coaching, of training in the intercultural context, but also in the diversity and inclusion context. A very warm welcome, Pari.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pari, Vienna Global Leaders. It's really fascinating how many powerful programs you have designed and how you've been working with global leaders, especially in the executive coaching field. How did your journey start?
So it was very interesting. Vienna Global Leaders is actually a platform and a community. It's not a company. The company is, the mother company is our main company called Eurasia Nexus Partners, which we call EUNEPA. And in EUNEPA, we missed very much the space of, in a way, storytelling, of bringing people together to share their stories of leadership. And I miss the sense of community. So we created Vienna Global Leaders. And interestingly, it started in Vienna because we're based in Vienna. And we actually hosted our first forums in Vienna. And then suddenly the pandemic hit. So I think we had already done a year of Vienna Global Leaders and our forums. The pandemic hit, and then we had to close everything down. And I think it was in 2020 that we just went, we had so much more fun with Vienna Global Leaders because we went online and we realized that we, like everyone else, we are in this pandemic and we're facing uncertainty and fear. And we wanted to stay close to our customers, our clients, the leaders, and hear their stories, share their stories, and hear what their issues were. So we had so many different forums in that first year about business continuity, motivation, what do we need to keep our teams inspired and so forth. And I guess it just continued that way. We really just continued with this platform and this sense of community. And that's exactly what we do. We now run a more standardized 4 forums per year. We do different workshops. We have different ways of engaging with people. But the main aim is really building a community and sharing stories, sharing our voices.
Yes, and it's really powerful. I had the pleasure to participate in events you organized on behalf of Vienna Global Leaders, and I still remember this wonderful event with leadership and dancing in Vienna, and actually one fantastic virtual session on female leadership. And once I also wrote down a sentence that you said, and it's really something that sticks with me in many situations. And the sentence is, if you can imagine it, you can achieve it. If you can dream it, you can become it. How can a person become a global leader? Or maybe first, who is actually a global leader, Pari?
Good question. Firstly, that's not my quote. I think it was by David Ward, if I'm not wrong, but I quoted from someone else, and it's a very powerful quote. I love that too. How do you become a global leader? It's so interesting. I sometimes, my husband and I, we have this conversation. We are Iranians, and then now we've been living away from our home country for many years. And sometimes when people ask us, so where are you from? Our heart is Iranian, but we're global citizens. We travel the world, don't we? All of us somehow. You connect with different cultures and people and places, and we're constantly communicating across cultures. So a global leader for me is someone who does that. At the end of the day, it's how do you create value for people, for yourself, and for your organization. And I think a global leader is someone who can do that across cultures.
I love your definition. It immediately shows how important it is to really have this positive mindset. And as for the impact, so much depends not only on this huge narratives we are part of, so this, big cultural stories we identify with, but also the personal experiences leaders share. How can we actually support this process of working with stories with leaders who are active across cultures?
I think how to support it through storytelling practices is to keep those stories alive, to be able to share those stories, to make time for it, because I know a lot of companies don't make time for it. So you really have to have that space to do that. And in a way, make it part of your culture, part of your DNA, part of the way we tick. I was talking to a client today, and we have just designed, implemented, and are running a learning platform, an e-learning platform for them. And I was very, very touched because his feedback to me today was, in this 1 year, we were able to create a culture of learning. And I was just so touched by that in 1 year, this happened. And I think storytelling is similar. You have to create that culture of storytelling. What do we get out of it? How do we see the value in it?
Yeah.
And make time for it. A lot of times I find we are so much tick this box. We have this to-do list. We have to just, all these outcomes and actions and results. And we have to also pause and slow down and take time to reflect. And I think storytelling gives us that.
Pari, I love what you are emphasizing, because it's not only so much about storytelling, it's so much about story listening as well. And it means for global leaders to listen to their employees, not to react immediately, not to respond immediately, but really to listen for understanding, listen to the stories and identify strength people bring to the table. Also to listen to with the intention to reflect upon or maybe even share what moved them in their employee stories. And what is even more important, to listen to them, to empower them at one point. Because actually many employees have got these moments when they themselves show up as a leader and the surrounding wants to follow them. So it can be really a very empowering process. Can you share how stories can be applied by global leaders, those working across culture?
It makes me think of two things, really. I think we're so, at least the leaders who I work with, we're so cognitive. We're so stuck in our minds all the time, and the thinking and the planning and the action planning and looking at different scenarios. And we're in a way geared, conditioned to be that way, and we lose touch of what's happening inside our body and how we're feeling. And you start seeing those signs that you'll get tension in your shoulder and your back if you're tense about something, it hits your gut. I find that association so important in storytelling, really reminding people that it's the whole body, it's the whole person. It's not just what you're thinking, but it's how you feel. I think we have to come on that level with our leaders, and again, give them that space and acknowledge them to use their whole body when they come forward. And also, again, it's sharing stories of vulnerability. It's not only emotion, but it's vulnerability. It's how did I fail? How did I pick myself up? What did I learn from this? How did I move forward? I think it's that we all experience it, but hearing that from other people, in a way, you live that story. And I think that's so beautiful, because every time you hear a story, you're also reflecting a little bit on your journey.
Yeah.
So you're pulling from that into your own life and maybe learning lessons from that and taking that forward. So I think that's also very powerful.
Yes, yes, definitely, yes. Yeah, I look at you and I immediately recall the moment when we were together in India, in Agra, sitting on a bench, a green bench, not really comfortable, but really beautiful park that it was standing in, with the Taj Mahal in the background, with wonderful fragrances in the air, some calm water, birds singing. In that surrounding, we actually had a very, very interesting conversation. As you have emphasized at the very beginning of our conversation, you grew up in Iran. Nevertheless, you were born in Kolkata in India. And as a young woman, you moved from Iran to the UK. After your studies, your PhD, back to Iran, later on to Austria. Right now, you are based in Vienna. And, I still remember sitting on this bench and listening to your story when at one point you said, Jana, I have moved many times, I have traveled so much, and still the biggest culture shock in my life I had in my own country, in Iran. And this is something that came to my head when I was researching and working more with global leaders, that many, many times when we talk about the global leaders, we picture a person who moves very, very often from one country to another, one continent to another. And this culture shock, this culture stress might be very often part of the game. And still there are many global leaders who haven't actually left their home country. They are simply leading people across cultures, across continents, with the time zones. And they experience, let's say, kind of this culture shock or culture stress on a daily basis without really leaving their, so to say, own space. And, whenever I think of this dynamics, I immediately recall your powerful story. Can you share?
Yeah. And that was an interesting time because so I was born in India. I come from a multicultural family. My mother was Anglo-Indian. My father was Iranian, who was born in Iraq, grew up in India, Iran, and Iraq. My mother was Christian, my father was Muslim. And when we went back to Iran, I went to an American school. So I must say, I lived in the bubble. I was the minority. I wasn't the majority. And the culture shock was in 1979. I was 11 years old. We had the Islamic Revolution. And suddenly this country, which was rather westernized, transformed into an Islamic republic. That was a culture shock. I mean, suddenly having to wear hijab and suddenly having your school closed and going into a girls' school and not being able to walk on the street with your brother because suddenly, he's a boy and you're a girl and you're segregated. This was very big culture shock. It was on so many levels, on so many levels.
And also the danger of a single story, isn't it? Because actually you are expressing the perspective as you are emphasizing from this minority point of view, your very concrete situation in your cultural context. Nevertheless, back then there were people who saw the same situation much differently. And this brings me to a very important question, because we have talked so much about global leadership, and still we need to distinguish a little bit between men and women who are global leaders. As your professional career started in the Middle East, and you also have lots of projects in Dubai, in other Emirati, but also in other Middle Eastern countries, I would be really interested about your insights regarding women in leadership positions, however, involving this global competences, especially in this context. There are so many questions that arise. As a woman, how can I have my voice heard? How can I get promoted? How can I have impact? And yes, with all these questions in my head, and not only my head, what has to actually change so that women believe in themselves much more?
Yeah. Yeah, I have to backtrack a little bit, Jana. So you said something interesting about the danger of a single story.
Yeah.
And I love that you said that, because this was my perspective. And I must say, culture shock that I experienced at that age, but this was a country that shaped and transformed me. And it was a country, so I left Iran at the age of 18 to study in the UK, and I came back at the age of 24, and I stayed there for many years because I believed very much that we each have a role to play in the development, at that time for me, the development of my country. And it wasn't only my story.
Yeah.
I found that so powerful, that awareness. It was so interesting, and maybe sharing this about women, linking that to women. I don't wear hijab, and I'm not a practicing Muslim. I've grown up with multi-religious backgrounds. I'm very comfortable in a Christian context. I'm very comfortable in an Islamic context, and with different religions. We grew up with all of that. And yet, when I meet a Muslim woman, I have so much respect and admiration. When I lived in Iran, I wore hijab. I wasn't necessarily happy about wearing hijab, but I wore it because I understood, if this is a way for us as women to move forward and to have our voice heard, so be it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in so many contexts, I had established my own company. I had studied, I had a PhD, I was a very respected figure. And I found that so interesting. I never felt less than a man.
Mm-hmm.
I never felt that. There could have been a few cases, I remember, where in formal settings where I would be meeting, the public sector in Iran and working with them, and some men would not look at me in the eye, and I'd get really offended by that. But again, bigger picture, I wasn't disrespected. It was because of their religious beliefs that they might not have looked at me. But I share this because you're absolutely right. The danger of one story. I think it's so important to get different perspectives. And that's definitely something we've tried to do in Vienna Global Leaders. It's not just look at a global leader's perspective, but every time we bring something together, a program together, we make sure we have different viewpoints and different perspectives. We ran something about women leaders some time back. We ran a program, it was a lovely one. We did actually something on football and leadership. And we actually, in that session, we had a Iranian American football coach. It was fantastic. An Iranian American football coach who joined us in hijab and talked about empowering women football players around the world. It was so powerful. And in that same call, in that same forum, we had a football player who was also a manager. And we just had, when we had a manager who wasn't that much linked to football, but was a leader basically. And I think that's what's so important. It's these different perspectives. And as you say, the danger of one story, really trying to observe this. And coming back to your question about women leaders, you also mentioned something about the global leader can be a global leader without traveling to another country. A global leader can be someone who works with different nationalities and contexts and is considered a global leader. We do that today. We don't have to travel to be that. It's a mindset.
Exactly.
It's for me, it's that empathy, it's that awareness, it's that attitude. That's what I find is a global leader. And for women leaders to have that mindset and that impact, I think we do. A lot of times, how I see that slightly different is we're still sort of fighting in a man's world. And I remember this so clearly. In fact, it was our Vienna Global Leaders session on women, and we were doing an informal session introducing each other as getting to know the different speakers. And really interesting because the different women speakers started introducing each other as, this is who I am, I have studied this is my accomplishment, and I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this. And then one of them turned around and said, this is who I am. I am married, I have so many children, I'm a mother, I'm a this, I'm a that. And everyone else just sat back and thought, we didn't even talk about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I found that so interesting because, you know, in a way, it's closing off some of our identities, and that's also part of who we are.
Definitely.
We don't have to play in that world. And I don't want to stereotype saying that men are in that world, because I know a lot of men who are not, and are very empathetic and very compassionate and share a lot of their personal life and their emotions. So it's not a gender thing at all. But I think for women as well, I think it is be who you are. You know, be proud of who we are. And for men too. I'm always a little uncomfortable when I stereotype, because I think it's always unfair to do that. But I do see more women who need that confidence, who need to show themselves, be proud of who we are and where we are. We have so much to bring forward and so much to share. And in a way, if we are that softer side, love it, be proud of it, own it, and use it. Use it. I think that is such an important attribute and skill.
Yes, definitely as well. I love your example with the introductory round, you know, when it was so obvious to all the women at the table, so to say, to play this male game, until one participant broke the rules and everybody questioned their behavior. Yeah, as you just emphasizing that everybody was so shocked about this world of obviousness. Why don't we bring our whole person to the conversation? Why do we emphasize only the professional side? Why don't we talk about personal? There is so much about, you know, this world of business for women, that we identify with different roles, that we take care of so many different issues. and we don't even question, if we are responsible for it or not. So, okay, on one hand side, I'm really aware of the fact that we shouldn't reinforce stereotypes. On the other hand side, I'm really tempted to ask you, what skills do actually women bring or tend to bring that could enrich the understanding of global leadership?
I love the skills of active listening. I think that's one of our most powerful skills to develop as leaders. Part of that active listening is also seeing others, being empathetic. And what I do love maybe in that sort of leadership sphere is how you empower other people. It's how you see the best in them and push them forward. The thing I would love to limit more in leadership is the ego.
Mm-hmm.
And I think working on the ego is so much being aware of it, where it surfaces, and also trying to understand what triggers it, where are, in a way, are insecurities that trigger that. You have the classic example of a woman or a man goes to an interview and the woman will always play her strengths down and the man will oversell. And again, I'm generalizing, but or when you're negotiating on salary, the woman will always be, oh, is this okay, or the one to bend faster, the man will be more demanding.
Yeah.
Sadly, I've heard this from so many people in so many organizations. So it's still very much that theme that we're seeing, and also the whole, inequality in the workplace. But I think it's things like that that we need to push more. Maybe it stems from the ego. Maybe it stems from really working on that a little bit more. I think it comes back to the self-confidence and our own self-awareness.
Yes, the self-awareness you are mentioning is the first step. So just to be conscious about what are our strengths, how can we apply them, what skills do we bring to the table, definitely. And this is actually something that is the crucial part of the narrative coaching, so that people share their stories and afterwards reflect upon them and see what it actually means to them in the current situation. And what is really important is that it should feel out really authentic. Yeah, so it's not about showing off, but saying with great, healthy confidence, this is who I am, and this is what I bring to the table. So, Pari, in 3 words, only 3 words, what does it mean to be a global leader? What do you associate with global leadership?
I could just throw out adjectives, really. Being a global leader, aware, active listener, connected to your whole body, and vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. And as for this vulnerability, I'm asking all my guests this one important question. What was a word that really helped you during the pandemic times? And what is the story behind?
I think my biggest lesson was letting go.
Oh,
It was letting go. It was, there's so many things we hold on to. And I think for me, I realized so many of them are not important, and focus on what is important. And some of them, they're not going to happen. Let it go. There's so many things we can't control in life, but be at peace with yourself.
what did actually help you to let go?
What helped me to let go?
Yeah.
What helped me to let go? Just that, just knowing I can't control it. I mean, I remember I was doing face-to-face in-person facilitation throughout the pandemic. I think it was just 6 months that I didn't, but otherwise I was traveling to different countries and doing that with the funny, COVID restrictions and things. I do a lot of work in Dubai, and so I'd spent quite a lot of time in Dubai. But every time I had a commitment marked in my calendar, I approached it with this, I don't know. I don't know if I go, if I don't go, if I, it was just such a space, Joanna. It was like, I really don't know. So let it go. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, let it go. It's not lost. Just let it go.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, because this is actually something I can imagine that can be really, really helpful for all the global leaders. Yeah.
Letting go, right? I think that
Exactly.
was a big lesson for all of us.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, yes. When we talk about global leaders, very, very often we focus a lot on their cultural background, on their cultural preferences. Currently, in the globalized world where people have got the opportunity to gather their experiences within such a short period of time, what do you think? What role does actually the so-called cultural background play? And in general, does it play any role?
I wonder about that, Joanna. I mean, I think nationality is one construct, but does it impact how we lead? I'm not sure. Does it does it have a role in the leaders I work with? I really don't know. I haven't seen it that way at all. Not at all. The leaders who I've been working with from all nationalities, they never play their nationality card. It's always maybe explaining how we might think differently, or why we think differently, or how we work differently, but it's not so much that national context. There's
Just
so many
one of
things.
the
It's just one of them, right? And I'm not seeing that so much in my conversations anymore. It's become so much more fluid, this whole cultural discussion. You're just constantly weaving between identities and cultural nuances. And I think that the key for me is always just be aware of your identity, what's shaped you. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yes. This is also something that I would like to relate to, that being Iranian, your book also from EUNEPA, is also about showing with this visual storytelling. So plenty of wonderful pictures that participated in the contest. What it actually means to be Iranian outside of Iran.
Yeah, that's a lovely, good reminder. Thank you for sharing that book. It was actually a project we ran. We have a nonprofit organization called the Seymour. It's not at all connected to UNEPA or Vienna Global Leaders. And it was actually a nonprofit which bridges cultural barriers. And we focused on identity, and at that time when we worked on this project, and I can't remember if it was like 2017 or 18, we had 3 projects. The first one was being Iranian. The second one was being the other. And the third one was being a global citizen. And we were using Iranian stories, the first wave. And the first one was through a photography competition, and that turned into the book Being Iranian. What does it mean to be Iranian through photography? This actually then was taken over by some colleagues in Italy and became a Feeling Italian project. Same thing with photography. The second one we did, Being the Other, was migrants. And what does it mean to be other? And we used, again, Iranian migrant stories. And that turned into a short film, and that's actually on our website. And the third project of being a global citizen, we actually didn't complete that. And I think one day we have to come back and see, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So you never know, Joanna, maybe you and I pick up that project of what does it mean to be a global citizen and see what kind
Exactly.
of storytelling will we take forward there.
Yeah, definitely,
Isn't that an
definitely.
idea?
Yes, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for all your stories you have shared, for your experiences, for your insights regarding global leadership and also the women's leadership. Really fascinating. And I'm really grateful for, this emphasizes on this positive attitude, on integrity, on authenticity. Sometimes when people hear that it's all about working with storytelling practices in the leadership context, many tend to think, oh, it's about rhetoric or really, just polishing the speaking skills. But it's much, much more. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you hopefully soon. And I'm really looking forward to, working on the Global Citizen Project.
I love that idea. Thank you, John. It was a lot of fun. And I loved the reflection and the questions. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.